Hey again, Zach Bella here, and this session I want to dive into mass movements from the fanatics and the crazy ones to the one you're probably part of and have been part of your whole life and have never heard of. What does that mean? So let's start with the one you're probably part of but you've never heard about before. There's a book that was written called The Cultural Creatives. This book was written by a couple who were career pollsters at a major university. They were hired to go around the world and get interest groups opinions on everything. Do Germans like hot dogs? Who wants to vote for what American president? And throughout the course of their work, they started noticing their own trends. They started seeing this interesting group, and so they started feeding their own questions into the book. And what they came up with after 30 years of research is the largest defined majority in the world. It's a group that they called the cultural creatives. The cultural creatives are a group that the easiest way to summarize their work is if you look at all of the issues that have come since the 60s, from the environmental movement, from the human rights movement, from the equality movement, to the racial equality movement, to the women's movement, to the organic movement, to the alternative healthcare, and New Age spirituality, all of these, there's about 30 things. And these people believe in almost all of them, and they support almost all of them. If you contrast that with the rest of the population only supports one or two of them, sometimes zero. But this group is actually 36% of the world, wherever they did their studies. So that's the largest majority in the world. No other group has the larger, consistent majority. These people aren't extreme left or extreme right. They take in information, they make their own decisions. They're not hardcore either way. The other part that really struck me is that, because it really hit home, these people all tend to think it's just them and their friends, and the rest of the world is going crazy. Because that's how I feel. But turns out it's the largest majority in the world, and that's us. But why can't we get together and why can't we go anywhere? So it brings us to the other part of this week's topic, which is the true believer and the fanatical mass movements. The true believer is a term coined by a man named Eric Hoffer, who's one of my favorite philosophers and one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century. Eric Hoffer was a migrant farm worker, and they can track his movements because they can find his library cards from the border of Mexico up to Portland, and they can watch him move seasonally. When he retired, he became a longshoreman on the docks at Berkeley, and when he died, he was the professor and the head of the liberal arts department at Berkeley University and one of the most celebrated philosophers of the 20th century. He wrote about the true believer, and the true believer is an individual who is prone to be susceptible to a radical mass movement. He describes the archetype of the person that became a Nazi, the archetype of a person who stands on the front of a church in America with a machine gun and tells you not to have an abortion because of free speech. These are the same type of person that come with a deep-seated frustration. And this frustration grows over time, and this frustration comes from not wanting to take ownership of where you are in life, and you want to give it to somebody else to create change for you. Now, this person is very susceptible to radical ideas, conspiracy theories. They need something to happen to make their life different quickly. And they're willing to do just about anything to do it, sometimes even die for it. And it's a crazy thing to be able to die for something to make your life different. And it's happening all over the world because we haven't recognized this archetype and how to heal and work with this archetype of a person. The most intense movement throughout the 20th century that this archetype of a frustrated true believer attaches onto is a concept of nationalism. You saw this with Hitler, you see this with America, you see this with in Iran and different places which have fanatical movements. Even England, everywhere around the world right now is being triggered by movements of frustrated individuals looking to give something else, generally the nation, power to radically change their lives. Now, why are we looking at these two things? They seem totally different, but we have this large majority of people who believe in a lot of the same things that are generally, in our perspective, positive for the world. The environmental movement, the protection of the planet, all of the things. How do we use the archetype of the mass movement and study that and really learn that person? And how do we use that energy to move the cultural creatives forward in the world? That energy creates identity, it creates a group, cohesion, action, and advancement unchanged. But for some reason, it's only been used to create the movements that we don't want to see happen in the world. So we're going to study both. We're going to dive in. We've got some fun stuff to do. I hope you enjoy. It's going to be really interesting.